have the great pleasure of introducing the Honorable Alejo Campos, Regional Director of Crime Stoppers, Americas and the Caribbean. We're dealing with illicit finance and foreign investments, navigating the threats in the globalized economy. And I will say I have worked with Alejo for the last decade and have been down there many times. He's been decorated, I believe, by every country in the Americas as a remarkable individual and greatly respected by our own customs agents for the work that he does and for security. We're going to co-host a briefing for customs agents in July, and who are very critically part. Before I get started, though, they found a diamond. Now, don't everybody come running. On the floor. So if anybody lost a diamond, it's on my baby finger. Come see me, and we'll offer a nice price. We'll do business. No, I don't know who this is, but we want to get it back to him.
Sounds like illicit finance.
Alejo Campos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for the invitation again, and thank you for your leadership and friendship in the last decade. I will be speaking in Spanish for all of you. Lo siento.
I apologize, but I'll speak in Spanish. The speaker says. How can I pass the slides? I've been asked to speak about illicit financing, illicit economies in the world. So the first point I'd like to share is try and define what an illicit economy is. We always speak about three elements, and this was published in an interview in a Panama newspaper asking how to define an illicit economy easily. So I was telling them there are economic interests that are facilitated by public policies and kleptocracy in a globalized context. So, economic interests, criminal or not, facilitated by public policies and kleptocracy. I will explain why. And all this in a fully globalized context. When we talk about illicit economy, we specifically talk about how organized crime generates money all around the world. In our countries, in LATAM and our regional neighbor, I'm from Argentina. I've lived for long in many countries in Central America, amongst them Guatemala, El Salvador, right now I'm in Panama, etc. And when persecuting crime in Latin American countries, we still persecute cocaine and drug traffickers. But today, there are other illicit activities and criminal activities that are just bringing the same amount of money or even more, depending on the country, to these criminal structures. But our criminal prosecution only looks for cocaine. And we will talk about illicit economy. We talk about illegal mining, money laundering, drug trafficking, corruption, weapons, cybercrime. And this is blended with a social element. It's not just about criminal. For a criminal to exist, you must have behind something that generates, that is generated with this cultural and social process related to changes in the values in the society, deep inequalities, extreme poverty in many countries, illegal migration, high needs from the population, and low education. So all this is the broth that makes these public policies that have failed in the country push the population, press the people before their needs to commit a certain kind of crime or to collaborate with criminal structures, and that is what criminals in the region clearly know. This, of course, follows the system of demand and supply of the markets, and we see it in the trafficking of people markets, where we should be punishing the client of these actions. Because if there are dealers and traffickers and victims, it's because there's a demand. So there's an illegal market, which is criminal, that is going to cover that demand with human beings, mainly women and girls. So I would like to enter and explain this diagram, which covers our current situation. This is our fixed picture, which is quite complex and becomes even more and more complex. Deviated globalization that we call the criminal governance, led by local groups, gangs, maras, cartels, depending on the countries. And this is important to start and mention them because in reality I come from a region and a continent in where many cases they provide Europe with illicit goods such as cocaine or other drugs or human trafficking, the amount of victims that are brought to the European continent or to Asia to be exploited here amongst others. And all these logics of criminal economies that are transnational, where we have the global criminal convergence groups. We cannot no longer talk about transnational organized crime. That is a concept from the past. Now all criminal organizations are transnational, but they work together. There's a new criminal order, which is what we call the criminal convergence, not only at national or continental level, but has a global level. And these global criminal convergence in our countries, they do no longer work with the local gangs, but with corporations, because where gangs in the decades in the past have become professionals, they have evolved, they've learned, and they have become criminal corporations. They no longer want to be the logistics employees of the organized global crime, but they have associated, and they want 10% or to be paid for a logistics service. They don't want to be that, but they want to be partners to the business. And that has made them to become associated corporates in different continents. And that is how we start seeing in some operations in Europe, Latin American nationalities that belong to criminal bands that are typical from Latin America, but in other operations in Latin America, we see the European nationalities or Asian nationalities of Asian or European criminal groups. So this convergence, that bond, this flow of crime happens between all the continents and is really related to all these scheme that we're showing here, which becomes even more complicated with what crypto assets or digital payment means, fintech banking. And the most important element here is that as they all work together, they have generated a portfolio of goods and services of criminal nature, where there is a context with no longer corruption. Corruption is a term of the past. We have to talk about kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is a system of corruption becoming global. And we will show some examples. And in the end, what is important today is the route. It's not so important to see what's the criminal product or service that is being serviced or I can offer. The importance here is the control of the route, which is national, regional, and transnational. LATAM Europe, for example, is transocean, and it's a route which needs to be controlled by criminals, and local criminal gangs, now corporations, defend those routes. They take care of those routes, and that's their best asset, because as they're all working together, they can all put their criminal products on the table, but the most important thing we have to pay attention to is the route. And take a look at what we were saying of organized crime that migrates to convergence. We are in a legislative environment today, so in our legislations, we still talk about lay against money laundering, drug trafficking, organized crime, or money laundering. And all our institutionalities to persecute crime is organized in the same manner. Prosecutors are specialized investigation groups per crime, but we're not taking into account the criminal convergence as such. Where is the legislation that will cover how to face organized crime today, which is criminal convergence? So with that renders criminal investigations more difficult. And I brought examples relating LATAM with Europe. In Crime Stopper in LATAM and in the Caribbean 2024, we've received 26,671 anonymous reports of those claims that they are work with the local authorities of the country. And that out of that, 14% has information related to Europe, mainly Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and UK, and mainly information related to money laundering, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. And these are the crimes. And also illicit trading too, forgeries and smuggling of products like alcoholic beverages, drugs, medicines, cigarettes that are highly forged all around the world. And this is another interesting scheme to give examples about money laundering, how the full logistics system is being used. It's a multimodal system of international trade, how some cartels in Mexico end up selling drug in the U.S. and they have a high deal of cash flow. They send that money to China. In China, they manufacture cigarettes that are forged cigarettes of a highly renowned world country, and end up in Panama, which is a logistic hub for international trade, and organized crime uses this logistic hub. So the product gets to Panama. From Panama, it goes to Belize, and Belize, because through the Chetumal free pass, they go to the Mayan Riviera. I'm sure you've gone to the hotels in Cancun with a high rate of tourists from all around the world that consume certain deal of products. And these cigarettes are part of the cartel. So they sell these cigarettes that are forged, that are produced in an Asian factory with the petty crime of the U.S. and it's ended up being sold in Mexico, that in shops that belong to these cartels, and that's how money is laundered.
And as you may see here, we have the relationship of this continuous route and how it is being used while abusing many ports of the USA to take these merchandise. Why? Because in Latin America, mainly in Central America, we think that whenever a boat comes from a port of the USA, it virtually comes with a SWAT team per container, but it's not that way really. So they're availing of that safety perception of American ports to board counterfeit products or legal products that come into Latin America and then continue overland to different countries. And that's important to see criminal convergence as one of the biggest drug traffickers in Costa Rica. We call him the devil, El Diablo in Spanish, mainly in the Limon area in the Caribbean coast. And that's main port where cocaine is sent for European ports, mainly coming to Spain or going to Belgium or the Netherlands. And the funding of this individual is through counterfeit cigarettes, also linked through the Caribbean people trafficking structures. So these crimes converge, and throughout the whole route that he needs to secure, he has people from Costa Rica throughout the whole route. And here we have another interesting example, the route Colombia, Dominican Republic, Europe. This is a finding from 2 or 3 days ago, and we can see how organized crime keeps innovating to hide cocaine. Now in plastic or ceramic fruits, as if they were ornaments, and these are hidden there directly, and $1 million seizure was made 2 or 3 days ago, coming from the Dominican Republic into Europe. Here we have another new case, quite interesting, that is being researched, that has already become public, regarding a network which is Panama-based, but it's a European network doing robbery, kleptocracy. And what this means for lawmakers and for politicians is the following. Whenever a criminal organization wants to get you out of the way, the best way is to ruin your reputation. That's the quickest, the easiest, and nowadays even the cheapest. To that, they create networks globally that begin attacking that person, generating real or unreal situations that end up impacting their reputation, usually linked to some sexual affair. And this network was discovered to be working between Europe and Panama, and they identified the people they wanted to coerce or to damage their reputation, and they had people who got closer to them until at some point they generated some sort of picture or video, or they got involved in some sort of situation, sometimes even drugged, and they spread that in the public opinion. There is still an ongoing research on that and investigation, but that's a so-called kleptocracy system which is working internationally. It's not just something that happens in Panama or in Europe. I brought this because it's part of these illegal economies, because it really generates a lot of money that at some point needs to be laundered somehow. And we have another human trafficking example. I brought really recent cases, and this Puerta del Sol operation began in Panama about 2 years ago. And in fact, it was a joint operation between Spain and Panama, where there were women being exploited sexually in Panama, or in Spain rather, in different places of Spain. They were coming from Panama, from Colombia, even from Ecuador. And the human trafficking network was a mix between Spaniards, Dominicans, and Panamanians. So once again, we see this international cooperation, and another investigation has been opened with this group due to drug trafficking. So we can see how in this portfolio of criminal services and assets, they play to generate an illegal economy. And these groups have usually a main illegal activity and then other parallel activities to fund the operations of the biggest one, or to leverage financially the biggest one. So let's remember that the largest one tends to be drug trafficking. And if I send kilos of cocaine for Europe, sometimes in order to get that money, so that is part of a laundering system, that will take a while. So in between, I need to fund my criminal operations, just like any other company, in this case with a criminal activity, and I may have other illegal activities also useful for funding purposes. But these parallel activities are becoming more sophisticated and more in demand, and they are generating very high amounts of money, sometimes as much as drug trafficking in some countries. Mainly in the countries that are not a route for drug trafficking, or that are not large consumer markets, these parallel activities, such as people trafficking or legal trading, generate more money than the actual drug trafficking. So that's the case. Here we have another police case, and the Spanish police released 19 Latin American women subject to sexual exploitation, and here we have the nationalities. And below we have another case, and I'd like to mention something here, because we're really concerned with human trafficking, the rest of our criminal products, but here we're talking about the lives of human beings, mainly women and girls. So we should just not overlook the statistics. They're not just a mere number. When 19 women are saved, these are 19 lives after all. And something funny happened while I was walking to my hotel, and I saw women through a video, and people were offering women through a video on a phone, saying that they were good, cheap and beautiful. So we can just naturalize those facts of human trafficking. And this is one of the latest examples. Another topic which is highly funding, and here are many companies from Europe and the USA being affected massively due to the counterfeiting and forging of alcoholic drinks reaching mainly the American continent. This is the second, sometimes the third. element in terms of counterfeiting. And to finish, we have here something that was organized a while ago. Here we have a picture of Darien in Panama. Fortunately, after the Trump administration, this is over in Panama due to measures that were taken. And they are having an effect. A week ago, one of the migrant reception centers across the Darien rainforest was closed. But here there was organized crime moving people. Right now, moving human beings, tricking them, is the most profitable activity. And to do so, they activate another criminal strategy that happens a lot, and that we see in interviews we've done with migrants at Darien, were mainly Ecuadorian migrants coming from humble locations, mainly in the mountains of Ecuador. They stated that they would have never thought of leaving their birthplace. They were living in a precarious poverty situation, but they never thought of leaving until criminal gangs got to those locations. They began terrorizing that place, and that expelled them from the place. If they didn't leave, they would be killed. And if you ask them, why did you go through the Darien rainforest if you could get killed? Well, they already had a death sentence in their place of origin. And that movement of people was generating an illegal economic flow to a criminal structure, to several, in that route. So there was a migration route creating much money for one or several criminal structures. So imagine all these people paying throughout this route through several countries, and the massive illegal economy that is generated. And here in Europe, you actually have similar situations that you can draw a parallel with. And to finish, we have some quick recommendations. The first one has to do with the political will. Without it, we cannot change this. And we need to combat corruption and kleptocracy. I think the Speaker of the Senate was saying this morning that we needed to update and harmonize the transnational legislation. That's essential. In the case of Latin America, we have laws in some areas that only existed for 15 or 20 years, but organized crime is changing daily. We cannot combat it with a 20-year-old law that is not harmonized with our neighbors or across the pond. So we need to have the political will to update the laws. And then the information exchange is essential. And we need to define and redirect somehow the agenda and the funding of these multilateral organizations and international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campos.